Welcome to Dead and Roasted. What can I get you?
Well, hello there. It seems one of my coworkers has begun acting a little strange. I keep hearing him mutter something about world domination and cat-girl clones for everyone. That's really not like him. I wonder what's gotten into him. Oh, that reminds me. I've got a great new set of scary and allegedly true work stories to share with you on my break today. There will be mysterious coworker transformations and disturbing phantoms from the past. Enjoy, because who knows how long we have until my weird coworker raises that cat-girl clone army. These are tales from the break room. My coworker's been replaced. From Pizza Courier 6. I know it sounds crazy, but I think my coworker was replaced by something. I want to start this story by saying I've lived in Nevada all my life. I like it here, and I generally enjoy the desert life, though it can get a bit too hot at times. So I've been working at a pizza restaurant for a while now as one of the cooks. However, I'm also trained to man the register and to take phone orders. Pretty much whatever part of the pizza making and selling process they need me at the most. It's an okay job. At this point, I've gotten pretty tired of the free pizza, but overall, it's a fine job. One of the more enjoyable parts is when I work with one of my favorite coworkers, Jim. Jim is a screwball who loves to play pranks and mess around, generally trying to make work fun for himself, as well as everyone else that's on his shift with him. Our manager doesn't really have a problem with it, since despite all the fun he has, he works as hard as he plays, if not harder. And we usually make more in tips and sales when he does work, versus when he doesn't. I'm a bit more reserved than Jim, but once he gets going, basically everyone follows suit and has fun together. It honestly doesn't even feel like work sometimes. Jim has also done more team building for me and my coworkers than anything corporate has done. He throws parties pretty often and usually goes bar hopping most weekends. It's been super great to get to know and become friends with Jim. However, like the title to this story states, I don't think he's Jim anymore. More so, whoever is showing up to work looking like Jim, it isn't Jim. See, Jim's parties were less than legal. When you live in a state that's like 95% desert, you can really do all that illegal stuff pretty easily. To put it simply, a lot of illegal substances, a lot of fireworks, and allowing our younger coworkers to drink. Looking back at these parties he threw, I can say they were all terrible, horrible ideas, but at the time, in the moment, they were the coolest thing ever. See, I also never really partied much in high school myself. I was straight edge. Only parties I went to involved Smash Bros. And pizza until 3 a.m. They were fun, but they weren't the same kind of freedom Jim gave me and everyone else. The final party he threw was one of his best. He set it up as an ABC party, or an anything but clothes party, meaning all our coworkers and any of the friends outside of work Jim said we could invite, myself and Jim's self included, weren't allowed to wear clothes and instead had to wear everyday objects and the like instead. Most of them showed up in togas made from bed sheets and blankets, which is what I did. Jim, on the other hand, decided to wear the various deer and bear pelts from his father's hunting lodge, which, looking back, may be why he was targeted. Other people important to the story are Susie, our part-time coworker and my full-time crush at the time the party occurred, who wore pizza boxes from work all taped together, our manager Andy, who was wearing a suit made out of duct tape, and Laura, our friend from outside of work who decided she'd wear purple balloons to look like grapes, and resident cryptid nerd. I know Susie was the one who came up with the idea later in the night to tell ghost stories. We had run out of fireworks by then, and most of us were high, so it sounded like a good idea. She went first, telling a story about a Skinwalker. While telling the story and also explaining to a lot of drunk people what a Skinwalker is, she must have had a plan with Andy as he suddenly popped out at the scariest point in the story to frighten a lot of the girls. Most of us laughed it off. Maybe it's because Susie's story was so good, but a lot of the folks there, some of whom had asked moments ago what a Skinwalker even was, chimed in with their own tales of it. At all of this, Laura pulled me aside from the bonfire to talk. "Hey, I think we need to change the subject," she said. "What? Why?" I asked. "You scared or something?" "Or something, you jerk. I just think we've said it enough." I don't understand what you're saying." "They are attracted to whoever or wherever its name is spoken." "Huh? Oh, do you mean Skinwalker?" "Shh, don't say it," she said as she drunkenly covered my mouth with her hands. "But they're not real, Laura. Susie made them up, right?" "God, you're an idiot sometimes. No, they're from Native American folklore." "So, what, there's really people out there that can turn into animals?" "I don't know. I just know my mom told me to never say their name like that, especially not repeatedly." "But why?" I remember asking dumbly. "Because they're attracted to it. If we keep saying it, they'll come here," she pleaded. I didn't really believe, but I wished I had. Instead of listening when it was my turn, I doubled down on it, thinking I'd be able to scare Laura even more. Laura kept quiet about it though, but I think she pulled other people aside to tell them about it later that night. But a lot of this was a haze. This next part is what we pieced together later on after everything happened. First, Jim started a small game of truth or dare with a few of our coworkers. This led to him and Susie getting into a fight over a dare, and Susie storming off from the game. Later on, Andy said he and Jim got into a small drinking game. He didn't remember how it went down, so I assume he probably lost, knowing how Jim held his liquor. Some of the other partygoers remembered Jim talking about seeing people standing around the bonfire, but they assumed he took some substances he didn't share with the rest of everyone. After that, no one else remembered what Jim got up to. From what Susie said, I went to comfort her after the fight, but then Laura pulled me away. She then made sure Andy got back to his tent and helped him inside. From there, she remembered coyotes yipping later on in the night, but other than that, she said she just went to bed in her car. I do, however, remember what happened after I woke up. I'd apparently bunked with Laura in her car. I looked over at her with my dorky smile on my face. "Good morning, wifey," I joked. "Oh, shut up, jerk," she snapped back at me. "Someone's hungover." "No, I'm just freaked the heck out after last night. We should have gone to one of our houses after the party, not stayed in the car," she explained. It was still quite early, around 4 or 5, and still a bit dark out with it being winter. We'd probably only been asleep for about 3 hours looking back on it. "Look, I saw a coyote around the cars when I got up, and I'm really freaked out. Can we just go home?" she pleaded. "I guess. You sure it wasn't just Jim being a weirdo with those furs on?" "Don't get me started on those. I had half a mind to whack him upside the head after seeing him dressed in them." "Whoa, sorry." I crawled to the front seat and grabbed my keys out of the cup holders, jamming them into the ignition. Laura climbed over and sat in the passenger seat, just scowling. The car started up and we were the first ones to leave. I drove slowly so as to not wake up everyone else who was sleeping in tents and beds of trucks and other cars. However, I did notice Jim wasn't in his truck, like he usually would be. He'd always sleep in the bed of his truck, so he could fall asleep looking at the night sky, about as poetic and romantic as the guy could get. At the time, I shrugged it off. In fact, I shrugged a lot of that night and morning off, when I probably shouldn't have. Once we were far enough away, I got up to speed and started to drive Laura and myself to my place. "I'm sorry, I didn't know all that stuff freaked you out so much," I told Laura. "It doesn't freak me out, it's just dangerous." "I still don't get how it's dangerous. you really don't believe me when I said they're real, did you? Well, did anyone you talked to last night? Just Susie, but I already knew she believed in them. I was mostly just mad at her for starting it. If she believes they're real, why did she start it? You know Susie, she likes to cross the line and push buttons. A little risk for everyone to get under my skin is her MO. Before too long, the subject changed to more friendly topics. Once we were back at my place and washing off the layer of dirt we were both covered in, we made a large meal to fight off our hangovers. That's when Andy called me. Hey man, you and Laura already head out? Yeah, just had some stuff at home we needed to do. It's no problem. That's not why I'm calling. It's Jim. I can't seem to find him anywhere. Please tell me he hitched a ride with you. No, it was just me and Laura. What are you talking about you can't find Jim? Andy sighed and took a moment, his voice a bit shaken now. I don't know, I checked all the tents and peeked in the car windows. I don't see him anywhere. Could he have wandered off? I asked worriedly. I don't know. I'll let you know if we find him though. Just keep an eye out in case he does somehow wander back into town. We'll be back as soon as we can to help search, I responded. I let Laura know who that was and what it was about. After we were ready, we went back out to help look for Jim, leaving our breakfast behind. Once we got there, we gathered all the information I'd mentioned before. We spent around 4 hours that day looking for Jim before finally finding him. We located him passed out a good hour's hike away. I was so glad it all worked out. At least, that's what I thought at first. Jim seemed really out of it. He was even walking funny. But I just assumed he'd injured himself and had taken something way stronger than the rest of us that night. After everyone got back home, things did seem to calm down, and stuff went back to normal at first. Laura had told me Jim was acting weird one day when she stopped in to chat with him and grab lunch. But I wasn't sure if a little chat was enough time to tell if he was acting weird or just messing with her. It wasn't until my shift with him that I realized what she meant. No jokes, no smiles, no fun. It was like Jim had done a 180. Instead of making fun of problem customers, he would chastise us over being rude to them. He stopped being as helpful as he was before, really only doing the job he was assigned to do that day and nothing else, which is very odd for anyone where I work. We all kind of understand what everyone is capable of, and we help out where we can. But now it was like Jim forgot how to be a team player. That weekend, when we asked what plans he had, he said nothing. By then, a lot of us, Susie and myself especially, were worried about him. Andy was concerned too, but tried to rationalize it, saying he must have had a life-changing trip or something, one that altered his way of thinking. I didn't agree with that. I still don't think that's what it was. It was Laura who said we should surprise him at his house to see what was really going on. Laura, Susie, and I drove there that Saturday, knocking on his door, but he never answered, even though his car was there. We even tried calling, and we heard his phone ring from inside, but Jim just didn't ever come to the door, nor did he answer his phone. Susie was the one who decided to look in through one of the windows. What she said she saw still freaks me out. She said Jim was just standing in his living room, watching himself in the mirror by his couch. He was waving and walking back and forth as if he was practicing. Then Laura said what we were all thinking by then, but it felt surreal to say our friend had been replaced by some creature from folklore. But still, I don't know what else it could be. I've worked another whole week with him, and he's still dead inside. He doesn't limp around as much, and he's far better with the customers again, but it's still all off. He's been burning the pizzas lately too, which is really weird, as he was the one that helped train me to use the oven. Maybe I'm just overthinking things. Maybe it's all in my head. but I still can't shake the feeling something's wrong. Susie tried to hang out with him at work, but Jim would refuse. She even apologized for the fight they got in, which he didn't even remember having. Laura refuses to even look or talk to him, now saying it's not Jim, and I'm starting to think she's right. The following weekend, Susie and I went over to his house. Laura didn't want to go, which we understood. When Susie looked inside, she said he was doing the same stuff as before, just creepily walking around and stretching. The day after, we went again this time, and it was even freakier. From the get-go, when we got to his door to knock, asking if he was home, we could hear him talking from inside. "Hello, my name's Jim. Hello, my name's Jim. Hello, my name's Jim." He repeatedly said this to himself for a very long time. He was practicing hand motions too, in the mirror. At one point, he turned around and saw us at the window. We ducked down and ran to the car and left. We're both nervous about our next shift with Jim, and we're unsure of what to do. Part of me wants to think something just happened to Jim, and he's just adjusting to some lifestyle change or a problem that occurred while he was high. Maybe he hit his head too hard, or he suffered a stroke, something like that. It's horrible to say, but I hope that's what it is. However, my gut feeling tells me it's something far worse. The Third Floor, from Volf. I worked at a decently sized retirement or assisted living facility, which had over 200 rooms and 3 levels. Today I'll discuss specifically about the 3rd level, or floor. I have had some odd experiences with this floor alone, and I'd like to share just a few of those here. My job at the facility was as a maintenance person, meaning that on occasion I would be on call in case of an emergency. My boss, who was the only other maintenance person, lived about 20+ minutes away from the facility, whereas I lived only 10 minutes or so. Depending on the emergency level, I'd get on the site first to assess the situation, then notify him if I needed additional support. I did enjoy being on call for the most part. Going to the facility late at night, when half the lights were off, had a sort of peace to it. One night, I got a call from my boss, asking me if I could stop by the facility, because part of the magnetic lock to the memory care side was not engaging, so the door was remaining unlocked. This can be bad, considering a dementia resident could basically walk out of that section out the front door, with no one being the wiser about it. The time was around 11 p.m. that night when I got the call. I was on site before 11:12. After messing with the various electrical things for about an hour, the magnetic lock finally engaged when it was supposed to. I then headed to the 3rd floor where the maintenance office was to check the cameras and put in a completed work order for the magnetic lock, mainly to document its repair. While looking at the cameras, I noticed a dark shadow at the fork in the hallway on the north side of the building on the 3rd floor. I stepped out of the office and looked to my right to see if I can see what the shadow was or who it was. Who would even be awake at this time? Squinting my eyes to look down the long hallway, I could definitely see that someone was standing at the fork in the hallway. I began walking towards them, trying to see exactly who it was. I began waving to them as I walked down the hallway, trying to get their attention, but they seemed to just ignore me. I was close to 30 or so feet away from them, almost able to identify who it was in the dim light of the hallway, when suddenly they turned down one of the halls. I hastened my steps to try and catch up to them. I turned the same hallway as them, only to find the hallway empty. I walked over to each door to see if they were unlocked, as I hadn't heard any door latches closing. But the doors were all locked. I quickly returned to the office to double-check the cameras. Maybe they caught which room they went into, or who this person was. But there was nothing. I even checked the time when I saw the shadow on the camera. There was nothing there either. On another occasion during the day, I was walking the halls looking for any of the hallway lights that might need to be replaced. While doing so on the 3rd floor, I reached the end of the southwest hallway when I heard loud laughing coming from the last room. There was no name on the nameplate outside the room to identify who the resident was. This wasn't terribly uncommon, so to be polite, I knocked on the door to greet the new resident and introduce myself. When I knocked, there was no reply, though I could still hear laughter from what sounded like an older gentleman. I knocked again and identified myself as maintenance. Again, there was no reply. So I unlocked the door with my key and cracked it open slightly, again identifying myself as maintenance. To my surprise, while peeking through the cracked door, I noticed there was no furniture anywhere. I stepped into the room and found it completely empty. I checked every corner of that room for a speaker or someone hiding from me, and I found neither. I thought someone was pranking me until I talked to our resident coordinator. They're the ones that show people around the facility and convince them to move in. Apparently, there was supposed to be a gentleman moving into that room in the afternoon. However, he passed away suddenly early in the morning before ever moving into the facility. While making my rounds one day on the 3rd floor to check lights and emergency doors functions, there was one spot in the hallway that had this very strong odor. The odd part was that the odor wasn't always there. I mainly found the odor around mealtime for residents. I thought that maybe one of these septic lines had a leak or a rodent had died in the wall. Both were disproven upon investigation. A resident, who we'll call Dorothy, noticed me lingering around the same spot, politely asking me, "What are you doing? You seem a bit confused." I explained I was trying to find the source of this weird odor lingering in that part of the hallway. Dorothy walked over by me and smelled the air. She then just smiled and chuckled. "You don't need to fret about that. It's just Martha waiting for her meal tray." I turned and looked at her. Martha waiting for her meal tray? Dorothy just nodded and went about her way. I sat there for a moment and realized the odor was right outside one of the rooms, but the name on the door wasn't Martha. I walked over next door where Dan was staying, asking him if he knew a Martha. He said, "Oh yes, she was a wonderful woman. Didn't go to many activities, but she was practically religious with mealtime." "What do you mean by religious with mealtimes?" I asked. Dan continued to explain that Martha used to wait outside her room for the kitchen staff to bring her the meals, even had a pocket watch to keep track of the time. I asked Dan where Martha was now. He diverted his eyes a little, then said, "Oh, she, moved on. We all do at some point. Guess it was just her time." "Dan, are you all right?" I asked, trying not to open a healing wound. He straightened up a little and smiled. We continued to talk for a few more minutes, during which the kitchen staff walked past with the food tray carts for the residents that wanted to eat in their rooms. Dan and I finished our simple conversation, and I walked back toward the office. When I passed by the spot the odor had been before, it was now gone. Not a trace of the smell. I guess Martha was just waiting for her meal to arrive. The Indigo Man, from Emma D. I began working for a local funeral home in 2009. I'd been desperate to find a job since the subprime bubble burst in 2008. When I saw a listing for something other than insurance salesman or military, I figured I would try for it. It was right up my street. Office manager. Really? My luck may be coming back, I thought, but there was a hitch. It was for a funeral home. I had no experience in that area, but figured administrative work was pretty much the same anywhere. This would be a welcome change of pace, for sure. And I got the job. Before long, I loved it. It was amazing. I had my own office with windows. I felt I was finally moving up. I took to the work immediately. Even Seth, my boss, looked at me and asked if I was sure I'd never worked in these programs before. Months went by, I settled in, and before I knew it, I'd been in there almost a year. The business office was an old house. It was built somewhere around 1935. It used to be the mortician's home. It shared a parking lot with the funeral home. I think my office must have been one of the sons' bedrooms. The other one down the hall must have been the other son's. The master bedroom was in the front of the house. There was a bathroom and a weird little room off to the side that held all the bound records of funerals past. The oldest pages were yellowed with age. Interesting to see the change in record keeping. First beautifully handwritten, then typed, then finely printed forms. An art lost. The causes of death changed. Mortality rate changed. I even found whole families that used this funeral home exclusively. This funeral home had been used for 60+ years. It was one of the foremost funeral homes in that area of town. Even my own family had used their services over the years. I never felt malice or anything strange in the business office. I felt welcomed, as weird as it sounded. I almost felt accepted. Does that make sense? Even when I had to go into the basement for old files, I never felt anything strange. There were so many antiques down there. In some ways, it felt as if time had stopped in this place. I saw one of the first clothing dryers, a big metal hulking cabinet with hangers on the side. One was to hang the clothes and heat would dry them. I never did understand why there were 2 old baby cribs in the garage, though. I wondered if those belonged to the sons when they were babies. I wasn't sure. As I said, time seemed to have stopped here. But there were so many windows, so much light, so much brightness. I imagined the wife filling the house with love and light. I could picture the boys running up and down the steps and laughing as they did. Now, with how light and welcoming the business office was, the funeral home seemed to be the opposite. I could easily imagine hearing sad cellos moaning and grieving violin strings drudging, barely perceptible hymns in the muted silence of the thickly piled carpet. The sashed windows barely let in the shadowed light hiding behind the shears, as if it didn't want to come inside. And the furniture was all so old. Vintage, some might say today. My mother once remarked while attending a service for a family member that the furniture had never changed from when she had been a child. My mother was born in 1947. The first time she remembered being in that funeral home was when she was 12. That was about the time the funeral home opened. The side table lamps were bulbous, garish. They barely gave off any light. The sunken chairs had seen so much sadness over the years. How many tears had become one with the fabric? A tiled water fountain took up the back wall. Cracked ceramic, dull porcelain, faded colors, and very heavy. But the fountain didn't work anymore. Pressed against a forgotten side wall stood a small prie-dieu. The kneeler fabric was worn into little dimples from where people had knelt over the years. A gracelessly large wooden cross hung in front of it. A dusty Bible sat forgotten on the ledge. Service or not, there was always a stink of dying flowers and melancholy there. The atmosphere was always dark and heavy, cloying. I didn't have to come in there much, thankfully. I hated being over here. I always felt like there was someone or something lurking in the shadows, and believe me, the place had many shadows. I especially felt it when I was standing by the broken piano near the street-facing entrance. A skinny and steep staircase stood roped off to the second floor. There may have been services up there a long time ago, but they'd been converted for students working their way through mortuary college. Those who hoped to become apprentices, and who knows, maybe have their own funeral home someday. But for now, they were the lowly ones on call all hours for removals. Convenient. Live there, bring the dead there, prep the dead there, then go to bed there. I was upstairs once. There were lots of windows. There was even a gated patio over the portico. I never saw any of the students out there, as the manager liked to keep appearances, so no one dare sit out there and smoke or cook out or anything like that. I can kind of understand that. As for the prep room, I never saw inside the place in my 9 years there. I knew where it was. I knew what went on in there. I set up backflow tests, sent state inspectors to check the embalming equipment, and gave the code to let people come and pick up the biohazard bags. Batesville dropped off the caskets over there. A lift came up from the basement prep room to the second floor so bodies could be set up for services. It wasn't for public use. Families didn't know it was there. It was hidden behind olive green and gold velvet-looking curtains. The tech from the elevator company made it a point to call me to tell me he was on his way. But really he just wanted to know, as he put it, if there was anyone in residence over there. Meaning if there was a body on the table. He about lost his mind once when a body had to literally be put on ice, as the refrigerator unit we stored them in had broken down. The funeral attendants had to hit up 3 local big box stores, taking their whole ice inventory to keep this individual cool. One day I received a call from the tech. He sounded out of breath and rushed. He said he'd gotten an emergency call and had to leave, and he couldn't remember if he had shut the door. He was rambling like a crazed man, sounded terrified more than anything. I asked if everything was okay. Yeah, it is now. I mean, it's fine. I just had to go. It was an emergency. I just had to go. Sorry about the door. I assured him it was okay and I would take care of it. Thank you so much, thank you. I had to go. Then the line cut. For the record, he never came back. The following month, someone new came in. I sent the phone to the call service, which had to be done if I had to leave, and no one else was present to take calls. I made my way across the driveway to the funeral home. It was late afternoon, and kind of chilly. It was that weird in-between seasons. Late fall beginning to transition into winter. I took quick steps up the back steps and let myself in through the flower room. No flowers today. I whooshed the door open to the funeral home itself. Again, that cloying scent hit me. The thickness in the air, the muted stillness. It didn't help that the natural light was lurking behind those heavy curtains. I flipped the overhead recessed ceiling lights on. The light sputtered, then went out. Nice. I took a mental note to tell the attendant those needed changed. I turned around. I felt as if someone was there. Maybe a student was upstairs. No, there was no one around. Minding the uneven floorboards underneath the deep green carpeting, I opened the narrow door that led down to the slender gray concrete steps to the basement. The door shut behind me. I felt a cool gust of wind as it did. It was on a spring, so the door automatically shut. It was still freaky as heck, though. I shivered. I made my way through the garage, past the black shiny hearse, and there it was, the prep room. Come on, I said to myself, it's just a place to perform a service to keep the dead from decay, to pretty 'em up for their last public appearance. There was no shock here, nothing weird, nothing out of the ordinary, just not my thing, And, just as the tech had said, the door was open, and the light was on. There wasn't any reason to turn any other lights on, because the fluorescent glow was enough, and I had my phone light if I needed it. The air felt like it had shifted, though. I assumed because of the garage area being drafty. But I just felt weird, strange, not alone. Slowly, I continued moving forward. I saw it then, a cold steel table, all the embalming equipment. All this so the dead's loved ones could get a final view. Stop thinking about it. Nothing here to be afraid of, I said out loud to myself. It's just you, and that dead guy. Who was it, Mr. Spaulding? He's got nothing to say." I laughed then, maybe a little too loud. It was mostly nervous laughter. I hated this. "Show some respect." I swear I heard a voice coming from behind me. It didn't sound like anyone I knew, no one that worked here. Weird. Was that in my head? Or was it from behind me? I wasn't sure then. A weird trilling ran down my spine. "Leave. You don't belong here." I wanted to leave, believe me. To just shut the door and get out. I reached the door, and I slammed it shut. To heck with turning off the light. Spaulding ain't gonna care. Get out. Screw this, I thought. 32,000 a year for this. Heck no. That presence had come again from behind me. It felt as if it was getting closer. Like if I didn't hurry up, I was going to be pushed. I swore then I felt fingers on me. Someone was touching me. Get out. You don't belong. I don't remember taking the steps, but I must have. The next thing I realized, I was outside, breathing in the cool fresh air and deep gasps. I looked back, but no one was there. No big nasty following me out. Fast forward a couple of weeks. Susan, one of the new funeral attendants, came up to my desk. She had a random question about clocking time for removals. It was a slow afternoon. I wanted it to be 5, and it wasn't yet. It was 4:20 on a Friday. We started to discuss. I learned she was a huge believer in the paranormal. She truly believed in hauntings, whether they were intelligent or residual. She had visited many haunted sites, and at one point, she'd been a guide for a hugely haunted reformatory. "Hey, I have something to tell you, but I don't want you to think I'm nuts." I started. "I work here, don't I? I mean, look at my intended profession." "Go on, what is it?" she said. I proceeded to tell her about what happened to me a few weeks back. She sat back, a bemused smile on her face. "What? Do you think I'm crazy?" I asked, incredulously. No, I don't. You just solidified something for me." "How so?" I asked, pushing papers aside on my desk and leaning forward, intrigued. "Well, when I moved in here, my friend Jane was helping me. She asked if I knew there was a spirit here, and I said I didn't. I asked what she meant. She proceeded to tell me about a shadow of a man on the porch. He stood, arms crossed. She had two feelings from him, disapproval and protection. She didn't understand that. She also didn't understand why he seemed blue to her. Not sad, but something about the color blue. I sat back in my chair, crossed my arms, and said, "Wow, that is strange. I wonder what it means." I furrowed my brow and pursed my lips. "No idea, but Jane told me I was okay to be there and not to worry." A few days later, after this discussion, I was on the phone with my mother. I was just talking about work, and of course I mentioned the basement incident, as I began to call it. I told her what Jane had told me, and mentioned the color blue. There was a long silence from my mother then, until she said, "We called him the Indigo Man." "What?" I asked, dumbfounded. "The Indigo Man. We would see him sometimes in the shadows or just at dusk. I swear he lingers in the funeral home too." "Okay, go on," I said. That would account for so much. Not just the prep room incident, but the shadows in the windows I tried to chalk off as lamps. Once when I was in the basement, I swore I saw a figure back in the darker recesses of the unpaved part of the basement. Now it all seemed to fit. "Yes, when I was a little girl, my grandmother told me about a man who worked the grounds there, and took it upon himself to watch over the funeral home. She said he never really talked to anyone either, but if the boys in the neighborhood would get too close, he showed up, scared the heck out of them, just stood there staring, and his skin was a deep blue. He didn't have to say a word. Well, I never ever knew him. He was gone before my time. Interesting. What's with the blue, though? Apparently, he and his family had moved up from Kentucky years ago, and they had a dark, bluish tint. They never really went out much. And the legend went, after his son and wife died, the funeral home showed him compassion that a lot of people didn't, because of their differences. They let him be the groundskeeper. They let him live above the funeral home in a little apartment. Maybe his spirit still hangs on out of respect and loyalty. When I told Susan about this, she was blown away. She practically screamed about how amazing that was. Then she looked pensive. Maybe we need to talk to him. Jane said he's harmless. I remember the feeling of fear I'd had that night. Maybe I should just stay away from the whole thing. No, if we tell him who you are and what you do, he might change towards you. After work, we headed next door. I was nervous, scared. She flipped the light switch on, but nothing happened. The same lights were still out. I felt a knot in my belly until I realized I never told them. Oh, I forgot to say anything. The lights burned out the other day. But then she responded. No, that's not right. I replaced them. Seth asked me to. That's just great, I thought. Lights always go out before a ghost comes and... Stop it. I was scaring myself again. Let's start upstairs, then go down. What are we gonna do? I asked. Talk to him. Let him know you're okay. He might listen. We'll see. She moved the rope from the steps and we went up, the floor creaking as we slowly rised. Room to room we went. Only 3 apartments, but the one facing the front overlooking the main street was the biggest. It was above the front entrance. I'm going to guess he stayed there. This one had a small bathroom, kitchenette, and a larger space for a table, and some space for some living room furniture and a bed. She began, Hello, I just wanted to let you know who we are and why we're here. We stood there in silence in the middle of the living room space. I wasn't sure if it was my imagination, but the room seemed to chill a bit. A tiny shiver ran through me. I didn't expect an answer. We left the room and made our way back down the stairs, standing in the reception area between the viewing rooms. Then that smell, that closeness, I felt eyes on me again. The weirdness. He's here, I think, she said quietly. You know who I am. I work here. I live here. You know I wouldn't hurt this building. She works here too. She nudged me slightly, as if to say, go on. I straightened my back, took a deep breath, and spoke. My name is Emma. I work next door, so you don't see me much, I guess. I think. I don't do the same job Susan does, but that doesn't mean I don't care for the place. I stopped. What else do I say? I had no idea. She nodded, then we headed downstairs, taking the same awkward, uneven cement steps that I had previously taken to the garage. I stopped then. I didn't want to do this. I mean, it was terrifying. The feeling like you're being stalked by something that's wanting you to get out as quickly as possible. Clearly, I wasn't wanted. That chill again came through me. Sensing my hesitation, Susan nodded. It's okay. If you're gonna work here, you might as well make some kind of attempt to coexist with him. She was right, I guess, but how often do I have to come over here? Really, hardly ever. We headed then to the prep room. I've never been in here before. Relax, nothing's in here. Nothing that's gonna hurt you. I promise. No one is in residence. She gave me a knowing side glance. Mercifully, she ignored my nervousness. Hi again. Listen, I mean it when I tell you Emma is not going to hurt this place. Quite the opposite. Oppressive coldness enveloped me. My breath caught in my throat. I tried to breathe softly and quietly. Then I swear I felt a hand on my shoulder from behind me. I was not liking this one bit. I wanted to go home. She continued, "The reason you don't see her is because she works next door. She takes care of the families in a different way, but that doesn't mean she cares any less for them. She shows them as much compassion and dignity as the rest of us. I think she has the harder job, really. She takes the informant's calls right when their loved ones die. Sometimes she hears the family crying in the background. That would be so sad." I nodded mutely. She nudged me again. What can I say to that? I had never looked at it that way. I just figured I was the person that had to take that info to proceed with the inevitable. "Hi, Emma again, but I guess you know that. Yeah, I take care of the paperwork and help the families get what they want to honor their loved ones. I kind of work behind the scenes. I might talk to them on the phone, sometimes see them when they drop off clothes and personal stuff, but I don't do what Susan does. Takes a special person to do that, and that's not me." I looked down at the ground. The air began to lighten. Still felt that hand on my shoulder though, but somehow I felt a little less afraid. "I promise I'll do my best to take care of this funeral home. I pay the bills to have the garbage taken out, flowers planted and watered. I make sure the grounds are taken care of. I'm sure that means a lot to you." Did it get lighter in here? The chill was gone. I still felt the hand on my shoulder, a squeeze almost like an affirmation, but then it was gone. I smiled and took a deep breath. Everything was okay. "Thank you," I said softly. As we headed out, I noticed the burnt-out lights were now on, every single one of them. Over the years, I made it a point to say hello to the Indigo Man whenever I had to go next door. Sometimes I had to park across from the funeral home and head to the business office. When I did, I made a point to say hello and good morning. Of course, he never audibly answered. I was at peace with him. Anyway, one day I had to get some supplies for the business office, and I felt it. I was reaching up to get the first call cards, and I felt the gentle squeeze on my shoulder. Most would freak out, but I knew what it was. I smiled and said hello out loud. No one else ever mentioned anything out of the ordinary, except for one of the other students that lived in one of these smaller apartments. Our newest student, Trevor, asked, more as a joke, if the place was haunted. Unexpectedly, Tad turned away from his desk, looked up at Trevor, and said, Yes, it is, but we get along just fine. And you will too." Then he turned back around as if it had been the most natural thing to have said. I worked at the funeral home another 6 years without incident. Susan had left a few years before me. I wonder if the Indigo Man wonders where we went. I drive past the place from time to time. Nothing has changed, literally. Same season-appropriate flowers. The grounds are still immaculate. If I see inside the lighted windows of the business office, I can tell my old desk and cabinets are all as they were. Even the old crochet doily I put over a filing cabinet was still there. As I said, time means nothing here.
The Old Man and the Gun, from Ltcupxakesfatman. I work for a delivery company as a driver. I won't say which one because I like my job and I'm trying not to get fired. My job can get pretty wild at times. I've been in a couple accidents, nearly died when my back went out in the middle of nowhere. Surprisingly, not my scariest story. Hell, I've even been hit by a car while walking back to my truck and shot up ready to fight someone. But this isn't about any of those. This is about the time I'm pretty sure I was in the house of a former murderer. I had just started my route that day and I was already pretty beat from the heavy week. It was a Saturday and it was light, so I was looking forward to just running through the day. On my last stop, I was delivering a cell phone and I needed a signature. I walk to the door and knock, and an older gentleman opens the door. The man looks to be in his late 60s, early 70s, and he looked like the friendly old neighbor we all might have had growing up. He signs for the package, and I'm about to leave when he stops me and says, "I'm sorry to bother you, but could you help me lift something up? I'm a little too old to do this on my own." policy states we are not allowed to enter the homes of our customers, mainly for our safety, and so we can cover ourselves if something were to break in the house, but I threw caution to the wind and told him I'd help him. I enter the house and immediately get hit with a smell that makes me want to gag. It smelled like someone had been leaving meat out to rot on top of a landfill. Immediately, I realized what it was the moment I turned into the kitchen. Piles of garbage that hadn't been taken out were just piled up in the corner. The kitchen looks like it hadn't been cleaned in months, maybe years. "Oh, sorry, I meant to take those. Over here," he said, and pointed over to a small table. I move over to pick it up for him. He asks me to take it upstairs for him, and I start to get nervous. So nervous, in fact, I feel my legs shaking. I move towards the steps and notice that as I go up, he is following close behind me. Unnecessarily close. He tells me to take it to his bedroom at the end of the hallway. And I notice so much more garbage is up here. It's like no one had cleaned in years, and now my heart was pumping. I knew hoarders, but this felt different. This felt like it was placed in a certain way. The rooms had been cut off completely besides his. I was having trouble maneuvering the garbage, but I got it in the room. As I sat it down, I turned around and I had a .38 placed in my face. Immediately, I put my hands up. "All right. Now I need something from you. I don't want to hurt you," he said with that grandpa voice. I was only a few feet away, but his finger was on the trigger, and I knew if I tried to move, he would definitely get a shot off. "Okay, sir, I'm here to help you. Whatever you need." My voice confident as it could be, but I could feel my voice about to waver. "I want all the money you have on you, and your ID." I slowly went to grab my wallet from my back pocket and grab what I needed. I handed him the whole thing. As he grabbed it, I saw him look down for just a moment, and I realized this was it. I dropped down enough to shoulder him to knock him off balance, and the gun goes off. My ears are ringing from the close proximity of the shot, but I'm aware enough that I notice him against the wall. I dart out, trying not to fall over the boxes and garbage, and run down the stairs. Another shot rings out as I hit the top of the steps and practically jump down. I run out the front door as fast as I can. I'm 6'1" and 350 pounds, but an athletic fat man, and jump into the truck and drive off. My heart is racing. I feel like I'm going to soil my pants at any moment. And the realization that I could have died in that crap hole kicks in, and I start crying. Eventually, I find a safe spot and calm myself down. I called my supervisor and told him what happened. He immediately called the cops and told me to head back to the station to fill out a report on what happened. The screwed up thing about it? Nothing was done about it. The cops didn't do anything afterwards. They filled out a report and went to the man's house, but nothing was done. Although, on our end, that address was permanently banned from ever being delivered to again. I was told that I wouldn't have to run that route anymore as well. A happy ending of sorts, but to this day, I still wonder what would have happened if I had complied with his orders. Would I be dead? Or maybe just been robbed? Who knows, but what I do know is that I'll never enter the home of someone on the job again, even if they are half naked and want the delivery driver fantasy.
Second Twilight from Dungeon Magister. Writer's note. My memories are a little foggy from this day. I don't remember everything exactly as I should. Some details may be left out. As someone who suffers from occasional hallucinations, usually auditory, it can be difficult for me to distinguish when I am seeing or hearing something real and when I am hallucinating. Usually if I am hallucinating, I can tell because of context. Rushing wind doesn't make any sense if I'm sitting in the room by myself with no sound except my humidifier, for example. Well, I used to do security for a major international private security company. In the short time I had worked with them, I became a respected security guard and been given management training to lead small teams for events and the like. My regular post, however, was just me, by myself, surrounded by darkness on a poorly lit grounds with a single, naked light bulb above me to light the guard shack. There were more people, but they showed up at 5 p.m., worked inside the warehouse next door, and I didn't see them again until I clocked out for the day. I worked evenings, you see. I would show up at 2 p.m., and I would stay until 10 p.m. or midnight, depending on the day. When dusk came and the light faded from the sky, especially in the winter months when the night came faster, it was just me and my reflection on the black mirror of the front window. The only other source of light nearby is a dingy yellow street light that barely casts its forlorn beams on the fringes of the guard shack. I eventually started turning off the light. I told upper management that it was so I can see the driveway when they asked me about it while they were reviewing camera footage. However, in reality, it was because staring at your reflection alone by yourself all the time just isn't natural. It's unsettling at the best of times. One night I had shut the guard shack, but deliberately left it unlocked. The lock can sometimes get stuck, and I bent my key the previous night trying to open it. The door gets stuck, and the knob doesn't work anyway, so it would seem locked to anyone who doesn't know better. So I was making my rounds at dusk until, on the north side of the building, a quarter of the way through, I hear heavy breathing, the heaving breaths of someone exhausted and on the brink of collapse. It's nearby, but I don't know exactly where. I look around with my flashlight, but I don't see anything. I started looking around trucks and in the nearby thicket. Nothing. "Who's there? This is private property. If you need help, I have first aid training. Just come out or say something," I shout out. I report in on the radio that there could be someone in the back, but no one answers. I try the management channel and even the materials department channel, but no answer. I keep looking until eventually the breathing fades away. Like whoever was doing it was just walking away. After some 20 minutes, I couldn't find anything and decided to move on with my patrol. I figured that it was a hallucination. I stopped inside the main building and told the night shift manager what I had heard. He blew me off like he always did when I told him things, said something about one of the mechanics in the garage not being able to hear very well. He said he would check the cameras, and so I made my way back to the shack. When I opened the door, something was wrong. My bag wasn't where I left it, the chair was in a different position, and my desk's top drawer was slightly ajar. I have OCD. I noticed these things for the same reason I was considered a good security guard. I flipped the light switch on and looked around the tiny room, but didn't see anything. I closed the door and locked it from the inside using the deadbolt. I was already on edge. I sat down at my desk and took out my phone to check the time. I updated my daily log with what I had heard, and when I looked at my reflection, my true eyes went to that of my reflections. It was not a passive or focused look like I normally wear, however, but the weary eyes of someone who wanted nothing more than to go get the loaded .38 in the car for protection. However, the sight of movement caught my attention before I could even start to make any plans. Another set of eyes. Eyes that were small, too small, eyes that were too small for anything human stared into mine. I saw them in the reflection, and my blood ran cold as I heard the rasping sound of struggled breath. I froze, just a moment, trying to figure out what I was looking at, but when I began to understand the otherworldly presence in the mirror, I spun my chair until I was looking at where it should have been in the mirror, but it wasn't there. That's when I realized that there was no reflection of it on that window. I looked back and it hadn't moved. I turned the light off to see where it was actually standing, and it was gone, just like that. I was staring at it as it vanished. I flipped the switch on and off to catch a glimpse of the phantom silhouette again, but it was truly gone. I checked the time on my phone a few minutes later, and when I lifted my head again, the specter was standing in the street nearby. It blinked only once. A 2002 Jeep Grand Cherokee passed through its body, wheels screeching, and as it careened off the road, I saw for one sickening moment as the shade vanished again as the Jeep smashed into the light post nearby. I sprinted to help the driver of the Jeep, but the door was stuck fast. I pulled the handle several times, but it didn't budge. The window was broken, and I reached inside the door and pulled the handle and pulled hard until the door moved a quarter inch. It was open, but stuck. The driver sucked in a ragged breath, a rasping, ragged breath. Tears began to flow. I was crying as I frantically pulled at the door. I thought he would die, right then and there in front of me, but then the door gave way. As soon as it did, I pulled out my phone and called 911. I explained everything as fast as I could, and the driver looked at me. I couldn't see his face, not completely, but I could see the tiny glints of the gold light coming from the light post nearby. It was the most horrifying dread I have ever experienced, and I couldn't stop crying. The tears were flowing like a curse. I saw the man move, tugging at something. He moved little, but not far. "I can't take off my seatbelt," he said. I pulled out my utility knife and cut the belt. He pulled himself out and stood in the grass, shaken but alive. Still struggling to breathe, I asked him if he was okay. "I think one of my ribs might be broken," he said. Smoke began to rise from the car. Within minutes, his car began to burn. I ran to the guard shack for the fire extinguisher we kept in the corner, but by the time I got there, even the cab was ablaze, and it would have been too late for him had I not already cut him out. He nearly died. He would have died if not for my hallucination, premonition. I wasn't sure, and what about my stuff in the shack? The fire department was already on the way, thankfully. When the cops arrived, his car was already on its way to being burned out completely, and they talked to him about what happened leading up to the event. They talked to me about my part, but in my blathering state, I wasn't much use. He explained to them how I cut him out, and they told me I did a good job and that I saved his life. I'm proud, but I don't know if I would have acted when and how I did had I not been so shaken and on edge. Apparently, multiple people have wrecked there. He made it to the hospital, and that's the last I ever heard or saw of him. I still don't know what happened to move my things in the guard shack, and sometimes I still think about the specter that night. I still think about how he could have died if I hadn't intervened on behalf of something that I'm not sure even existed.
Tales from the Break Room is a viewer-submitted podcast featuring allegedly true scary stories that happened on the way to, on the way from, or at work. If you want your story to be narrated on the show, send it to us at eriecast.com/submit. As of April 14th, we're paying 3 cents per word for stories that are approved and make it onto the show. Submission does not guarantee approval or payment. For a limited time only, PayPal only. Tales from the Break Room is an EerieCast Network original podcast hosted by Darkness Prevails. You can follow him on Twitter at Dark Prevails, and you can hear thousands more stories read by him on our other show, Unexplained Encounters. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow and rate Tales from the Break Room on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You can also enjoy plenty more horror-themed podcasts at EerieCast.com.